We are going to talk about 3 things this morning, which means I probably have to talk fast so we can get through it all. But several things that we've recently spoke about, but I think we need to go a little bit more in depth on it, just because of some things that have occurred recently. So this morning, Casey and I are having a conversation about new construction. And as you know, I think you know, whenever you go out to buy new construction, if you're buying from one of the big builders that does all new construction, they have got a clause in their contract that says that they are willing to pay X amount of dollars toward the buyer's closing expenses, incentives, but you have to use their preferred lender. That's very common. It's been like that for all 32 years I've been in the business. They've changed the way the contract reads about 13 years ago or so. And it's, so you know, you wonder, gee whiz, is that really fair? They're not saying you have to use their lender. They're not saying that. What they're saying is that if you use their lender, then they will give you the closing cost incentive. That's what they're saying. Now, as a lender that's not currently a preferred lender in new construction, I probably don't like that much, because Casey sends me a buyer, I'm working with the buyer, we get everything done, we answer all their questions, we structure their loan, we do all these different things. They walk into a new construction and there's a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 incentive if they use the builder's mortgage company. And so if they're my client, I encourage them to use the builder's lender, even though I'm walking away. I can't make up that kind of money for them. And I'd like to think I'm good, but I'm not worth an extra $5,000 or $6,000 or $7,000. It just doesn't work that way. That'd be foolish of me. Therefore, if they're going into new construction subdivision, they're probably going to be leaning toward one of the preferred lenders that now they can call me and ask me, Greg, do you know this lender, this lender, this lender? And if I know them, I can maybe advise them and make sure they pick the right company. And then they can send me a note. Sometimes they'll send me a note, say, what do you think of this deal? And I'll look at it and say, it looks good, or it looks fine, or it's okay, or you're getting ripped off, and whatever it is, we tell them. But here's what Casey and I were chatting about. Besides that this morning, a lot of the people getting ready to close on their new construction homes right now started the process last fall. They started it in October, November, December, and now the homes are being finished. They're getting ready to go. Well, what's happened in that 7 months? Interest rates have skyrocketed. Now, here's an interesting thing. If you read the builder's contract, if you don't close, you lose your earnest money and any option money. You lose. You're done. You're toast. Because you can no longer qualify. So now you've got people scrambling to be able to get something done in the event that now they don't qualify for their home. Because when we qualified them at 3 1/4, or the builder's lender qualified them at 3 1/4, 3 1/2, 3.75, and now they're getting an interest rate of 5.5 or higher, all of a sudden they may not qualify. What do? Now, there are some builders who are trying to be cooperative and help and figure out ways to make it happen. But bear in mind, builders don't have a lot of flexibility, because construction costs are what they are. It's not like they can just all of a sudden just start cutting, because they still have to pay for all the materials, everything that they bought. So what do? Well, some builders are just kind of cut and dry. Either you qualify, or if you don't, I'm going to take your money and I'm just going to sell it to somebody else, because the demand for this house is still very high, and there are people who qualify, so I'm going to give them that house. And then your buyer is, screwed. I mean, it's kind of sad. But I think to two messages: anybody who has been pre-approved some time back, be absolutely certain, whether it's new construction or whether it's a resale home. Resale homes, we don't have people all the way back. They might have been pre-qualified, but they weren't under contract. New construction, they were under contract. That's what makes it more difficult. So just be absolutely sure that you and your buyer are on the same page. They go to new construction, there's a lot more at risk. Does that make sense? Questions? Comments?
It also just occurred to me that a really funny thing that you could do if you have a buyer that's not under contract and they're looking for a new construction, go make that relationship with the salesperson and say, are you guys taking backups
Yeah.
on your offer? Because if they have somebody that 4 months later can't qualify, I don't know anybody else that's doing that. The builder might be open to it if they're seeing a lot of terminations because the guy won't qualify.
And there are some. I mean, it's happening. Any other comments or questions on that? But again, you go into new construction, generally speaking, they're going to use the builder's lender, and that's just part of the deal, and it's okay. I mean, it's just the way they do the business. Manuela, then we'll go to Pedro.
How are they able to offer this $5,000-$6,000 off the closing costs? How are they physically able to do that?
They build it into the price of the home. Great question. How do they have that? They just, when they price the home, they have that built into the price of the home.
Do they get a kickback from that mortgage company?
No, that's a good question. Are they getting a kickback? For years, I was a preferred lender. There was a very, very large private lender here in town, a private builder here in town called Crown Communities. He made millions and millions and millions of dollars. He sold his company back, I think it was 2014, might have been 15, to DHI, to D.R. Horton. He sold it to them. But I was one of their preferred lenders, and then when Horton bought them, I was for a while there. Here's how they do it. We never gave a kickback to the builder, ever. What we did is, like in the case of Crown Communities, and at that time, Horton, it's changed a little bit now, they would give a $5,000 credit if you used us or one of the other. There were 3 of us that were preferred lenders. If you used us, they'd give you $5,000. We would pay $500 of the $5,000. And that was actually written right into the contract. So that if Jessica came in to buy a house, she would see, you're going to get a $5,000 credit if you use one of our lenders. And if you do, that lender is going to contribute $500 of the $5,000. So there's no question, so no kickbacks. We would sponsor something for them from time to time, but no money went back to the builder at all.
So what's the incentive for them to do that?
The incentive for what? The mortgage company to do it?
What's the incentive for the builder to say, if you use this lender?
Oh, control.
Okay.
Control. If you're a builder, it's not such a big deal today, but it has been for a long time. People would come in to write a contract, they'd have a lender with them. Is every lender a good lender? No, people shaking their heads. There are a lot of good lenders. There's also a lot of lenders that shouldn't even be in the business. So the builders got this house they've built, and they got this lender that comes in, and the lender is doing a shoddy job, and so as a result, the builder, now the house is supposed to close, and the lender says, well, I can't close the home. And the builder says, what do you mean you can't close the home? And they say, well, I can't close it. So now the builder's screwed. And that went on for a long time. Builder said, we're not doing that anymore. We are going to pick 1, 2, or 3 lenders, and you are going to do all our loans. And if you don't close the loan, you will never be in the subdivision again. That's how they do it. That's how they do it. And they control. And most of the builders have a very, very strict process, especially the bigger builders. When, as a lender, you have to turn in weekly information on where that loan is and what's going on, blah, blah, blah. So it's pretty strict. So, and that's good. That's not a bad thing. Okay, that's why they do it. Pedram?
You were saying that you used to be a preferred lender. I've noticed that typically when you deal with the preferred on-site lender, you never have an issue with appraisal because you have more. You as a preferred lender, how many issues did you have?
You know,
with appraisal coming in
I don't.
on-site?
The only time that we would have issues with appraisals is two situations. The first house, or first two houses in a subdivision. One of the developments that I did was down in Lithonia. And the two agents that were there, they referred, I mean, there were three of us, but I got all the loans, which is wonderful of them. And, but the first two were tough because these were brand new construction, beautiful homes, but there were no comps. There were no comps. So the first two were a bit of a stretch. Once those two closed, it was just clear sailing. The only other time we have an issue, or the builder has an issue, is if somebody buys a house for, let's just say that the base house is $400,000, and somebody goes and sticks $100,000 of options in it. And most of the homes are selling for $425,000, $435,000, $450,000, and all of a sudden you've got one for $500,000. That's a problem. Now, if the lender and the sales agent are good, they're warning that person that you could have an appraisal issue. So most of the on-site sales agents are trained to know what to say in a case like that. You can put in all the options you want. But the other thing that most builders do is if you're doing options, you're paying for some or all of those options up front because the builder's not going to be out. Good question. Anybody else on new construction?
And just kind of a question, but I've noticed that like certain communities in this market, it's like every time they close 3 properties, they update the pricing structure for the neighborhood to, so like they close 3 properties, now they've got 3 comps to suggest a higher price, they ratchet up to the higher price, they close 3 more, they have now a suggestion for a higher price, they ratchet up to a higher price.
You know, I didn't see it as much, Casey, based on number of closings. I saw it over time.
Right.
Normally, when I was in subdivisions I was in, as time went on, if you're in that, the home prices would start going up usually 5 or 6 months from now. You know, from the time the first one was 5 or 6 months, and then another one, 5, and they kept moving up from there.
Yeah.
So that was something that I saw quite a bit when I was doing new construction.
But now in new construction.
I will never be able to hear you, so I'm coming back here.
New construction, though, it's not over months, it's the amount of homes.
For lots,
Like,
it's a lot
yeah,
premium.
Every 2 to 3 lots.
Yeah,
That
because
they
the new
sell.
construction company, subdivision that I'm in, we moved in the beginning of the pandemic. Now the house is $100,000 more because they kept raising, you know, it's worth
Right.
more. So it's every 3 houses, or every 4 or 5.
So much time, the house prices keep going up. Right, exactly. So, you know, just beware when you're doing new construction. Those are some things you're going to run across. And, you know, all right. The next thing I want to talk about, because this just came up, it came up on Thursday of last week and it came up again this morning. You're writing, you know, let's face it, we're all seeing this thing called appraisal gaps in a lot of our contracts, right? You're seeing something about appraisal gaps? Well, if you're writing an FHA loan or a VA loan, there is something called an amendatory clause on page 2 of the financing contingency. And it's very clear, and it states you have to put in the sales price in the box. There's no days. It's not like you have a 10-day or 0-day or 15-day. If it does not come in at the sales price, the buyer can walk away. Period, exclamation point. Now, people want to put in a appraisal gap. Now, I'm going to tell you what HUD has said, and then I'm going to tell you what an attorney locally has said, and I think the attorney's wrong. HUD has said that absolutely nothing you write in your contract can trump our amendatory clause. That's what HUD says. I mean, we went to HUD last year when all this was coming around, and HUD says, I don't care what you write in your contract. If that house is written, if you sold it for $300,000, it comes in at $280,000, I don't care what you put in your contract. The buyer has the option to walk away. Period, exclamation point. Well, a very large law firm here in town has made a statement and says, that's not true. You can write an amendatory clause, everybody signs it, they've even given specific language as to what happens, and so you can put it in there. Now, honestly, I'm going to go along with HUD. You're talking about the federal government. And this attorney happens to be an extremely strong attorney here in town that is actually very involved in writing contracts and doing a lot of things. And they made that statement. They actually wrote this for a real estate agent. And I looked at it and I said, I don't think so. And the real estate agent said, look, here's the person who gave it to me. And I said, okay, fine. You know, to me, look, earnest money is not my headache. It belongs to Dwayne and Mike. But I will tell you this, I would not argue with HUD because I don't think you can win. Or with the VA administration if it's a VA. Now, as Camille and I were chatting this morning, we've got one right now that we may do an FHA loan on, and the buyer has the money to go above the appraised value if needed. Can you put that in the contract?
Yes.
Absolutely you can. Thank you. It doesn't mean the buyer has to do it. If you got a good listing agent's going to say, wait a minute once, this doesn't mean anything. Well, what it's intended to tell you is that as long as they like this home and they're down this path, they've got the money to do it. Here it is. So you can write it in the contract, but the buyer can step away if they choose to. So I make the point, whether it's a FHA or VA loan and the appraisal comes in low, if the buyer chooses to pay more, they have the option to do that. There's no FHA or VA law that says you can't pay above appraised value. You can. But your loan amount's going to be based on the appraised value if it's lower than the contract sales price. Then you can put in more money if you choose to do so. And that's the difference between FHA, VA, and conventional. Conventional, if you write an appraisal gap, that's what you're getting. FHA, VA says the appraisal gap becomes optional if we choose to, if it comes in low. Does that make sense? I want to make sure we're getting that right, because now that I've seen this discrepancy out there, and I disagree with that attorney, because, again, I'm not arguing with HUD, that's for sure. You don't win that way. Any questions on that?
I don't know how you'd sell that to a listing agent. The listing agent's gonna receive that contract and be like, you wanna do what with the amendatory clause? I wouldn't accept it.
There's no way as a buyer's agent I would accept that. I mean, there's no way. But this particular agent that I saw this, it really wasn't my agent, it was my buyer who happened to be using an agent who happened to write a contract, and the other agent was sharp as a tack. But I think he was wrong.
Wow.
He was just following what the attorney said, and I think the attorney was wrong, but whatever. All right, if no other questions on that, one last thing I want to go over. We talked about this, I don't think might have been last week, maybe the week before. When you're calculating payments for people on the fly, remember these three numbers. If it's a 5% interest rate, you take the number of thousands times 5.35, and that's your principal and interest. So if I have a $300,000 mortgage, not sales price, if I have a $300,000 mortgage, and I've got a 5.5% interest rate, I'll write this up here in a minute, 5.5, I take 300 times 5.65. Somebody have a calculator? Figure that one out for me real quick. I know it's going to be somewhere around 16 or 1700, but $16.95. That's the principal and interest payment within a couple dollars. All right? So 5.65. So if I'm at 5% interest rate, it's 5.35. At 5.5% interest rate, it's 5.65. And if it's at 6%, it's $6. Okay? So while you're on the fly, you don't have to take out a mortgage calculator, you don't have to take out the spreadsheet and do all that. All you simply do is take this number, multiply times number of thousands, 300. That's your principal and interest, then add your taxes and insurance, and if there's applicable PMI. Make sense? It's done so quickly. And I have to tell you, here I am in the mortgage business, you call me up, guess what I do? I mean, rather than sit on this thing, I mean, because if I take the time to go through this, it's going to come up to this number anyway. Does that make sense? All right, helpful? All right, cool. All right. We are going to have a very interesting huddle next week, so I hope all of you can make huddle next week. We are going to kind of take what I call a sales technique. We're going to take a sales technique and apply it to real estate. Now, Mike teaches tons and tons and tons of stuff of sales. He always does. And I'm not trying to trump anything Mike does because he's got it, he's an expert at it. But over the years, I've noticed that there are some things you and I can do, and they are in sync with what Mike teaches on things you and I can do, especially in a market like this, to make sure that we have a higher degree of probability that we will win that client. All right? That'll be next week. All right, thanks everybody.